The screech of gulls cut through the thick fog like a warning as Aidan Morrow brought his Amazon van to a halt in front of the looming Victorian house on Bayview Street. The February wind howled through the streets, biting into his skin like icy needles, but Aidan barely felt it. His eyes were locked on the house, its gabled roof and peeling paint standing defiantly against the swirling haze. The fog was slowly lifting over Penobscot Bay, casting a milky, ghost-like veil over Camden Pier, where fishing boats swayed gently in the distance. The two-story mansion before him, divided into apartments, looked like it had been plucked straight out of a New England postcard. It was a little shabby, sure, but undeniably charming, with an air of quiet resilience. For the last 6 months, Aidan had been unable to stay in Portland. Every street there was a living memory of his mother. Their walks through the city, her laugh, the fierce determination with which she had faced her illness. The grief had grown unbearable, and when he saw the Amazon driver vacancy in Camden, it felt like fate. A new town, a new life, a chance to escape the ghosts of the past. The creak of the porch steps pulled his attention, and there stood Mrs. Donovan, the landlady. She was bundled against the cold, her sharp eyes narrowing as she gave him a once-over, as if she could read every thought and secret etched into his weary face. The gray-haired woman with kind eyes reminded him of the grandmother he'd never known. "I hope you enjoy your stay with us, sweetheart. Camden is a special place. In the summer, it's just paradise. But in the winter, we're all like family to each other." Aidan smiled. This was exactly what he was looking for, a place where he could feel like he was part of something bigger. He spent the first week getting used to his new delivery route, the narrow streets of the old town, the stately mansions on the hills, the cozy houses by the bay. Every day opened up new corners of Camden to him. The people here were different, unhurried, friendly. They knew each other by name, stopped to chat in the middle of the street, waved to passing cars. On Friday night, after finishing his shift, he decided to stop by Martha's Cafe, the only place in town that was open late. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. The warm aroma of fresh pastries and coffee enveloped him, making his stomach remind him of the missed lunch. "Have a seat wherever you like, sweetheart," smiled the woman behind the counter, who was obviously the same Martha. "You must be the new Amazon driver? I saw your van outside Mrs. Donovan's house." "News travels fast around here." Aidan grinned, settling himself at a table by the window. "Oh, you have no idea." Martha winked, approaching with a menu. "In a small town, everyone knows everything about everyone, sometimes even before it happens." At that moment, the door opened again, letting in a gust of cold air and a girl in a voluminous, coarse-knit sweater. She shook the snow from her dark hair and headed straight for the counter, clearly making herself at home here. "Hi, Martha. Can I get a regular?" "Sure, Sage. Your father stopped by this afternoon looking for you." The girl wrinkled her nose, and Aidan noticed how her shoulders tensed. "I was in class. I have a new schedule now." Well. Martha stretched out with an understanding smile. "Sit down for now. I'll make your coffee." Sage turned around, looking around the room, and their gazes met. She had amazing eyes, light gray, almost clear, like seawater on a cloudy day. She gave him a slight nod, acknowledging the presence of a stranger, a rare occurrence in their small town. "Hey, new guy," Martha called out in surprise. "Would you like to join us? Sage is just about to tell us why the local college is better than any Ivy League university." The girl rolled her eyes but smiled. "Martha feels it's her duty to introduce all the new residents of the town to all the old ones. It's part of my duties as the keeper of the town's traditions." Martha stated importantly, placing a large cup of cocoa and marshmallows in front of Sage. Dated importantly, placing a large cup of cocoa and marshmallows in front of Sage. Aidan moved behind the counter, and the conversation flowed by itself. Sage was a sophomore, majoring in marine biology. Her father was the town's sheriff, and from the way she avoided the subject, Aiden realized their relationship was complicated. By the time Sage was getting home an hour later, it was getting dark outside the window, and the snowfall had intensified. "Maybe I should give you a ride," Aiden suggested. "It's time for me to get the van back to base anyway." She paused for a second, as if weighing something in her mind. "Thanks, but I like walking in the snow. Besides, my dad doesn't approve of me getting into cars with strangers, but we're not really strangers anymore." Aiden smiled. "All the more so," she replied cryptically, and walked out into the blizzard, leaving him to ponder those words. Martha, wiping down the counter, hummed, "Good advice, sweetheart. Be careful with the sheriff's daughter." Garrett Caulfield takes his responsibilities very seriously, especially when it comes to his only child. Aiden nodded, but thought to himself that Sage's gray eyes were worth any risk. After all, he'd come to Camden for a new life, and it looked like it was just beginning. March had been unusually warm in Camden, the melting snow revealing the first shy crocuses through the last year's foliage. More and more often, Aiden noticed that his delivery route seemed to pass by the college building just as Sage was finishing classes. Their meetings seemed random, a brief conversation at the library entrance, a coincidence at Martha's cafe, an unexpected encounter at the bookstore on Main Street, but they both knew there was no such thing as coincidence. In a small town where all paths inevitably cross, they learned to create their own coincidences. "You know what the hardest part is when your dad's the sheriff?" Sage once asked, as they sat on an old pier with their legs dangling over the water. "Everyone thinks you have to be perfect, right? Like you're not entitled to your own mistakes and decisions." Aiden watched the wind play with her hair. It glinted copper in the sunset sunlight. "What do you want to be?" "Just myself. Someone who can study to be a marine biologist instead of a lawyer like Dad wants. Someone who can date whoever she wants, not his deputy son." Their first kiss happened on a rainy evening outside Martha's cafe. Sage waited there for him after her shift, hiding from the downpour under the back door visor. Raindrops dripped down her face as she reached for him, but the idyll didn't last long. Sheriff Garrett Caulfield wasn't one to leave out details, especially when it came to his daughter. Their first meeting was outside the police station. Aiden was just delivering a package when the massive figure of the sheriff appeared in the doorway. "So, you're our new Amazon driver," Caulfield pronounced, scrutinizing him. There was no direct threat in his voice, but something in his intonation made Aiden tense. "Job, sir." "Of course you are. And random encounters with my daughter are part of the job, too. Camden's a small town." "Exactly. Everyone knows everyone here. Protects each other. I hope you know what I mean." After that conversation, their meetings with Sage became even more secretive. They met in an abandoned lighthouse on the Cape, in an old boat shop, in secluded corners of the city park. Each meeting was like a little adventure. Each kiss tasted like forbidden fruit. Martha, of course, saw everything, but she kept silent, only occasionally shaking her head when Sage slipped through the back door of the cafe, or when Aiden accidentally stayed out late. "You're playing with fire, girl," she said once when Sage was helping her close the cafe. "I know what I'm doing, Martha. My father has no right to decide who I date. He doesn't own me." This conversation was overheard by a passing sheriff deputy. By the following evening, Garrett Caulfield knew that his daughter was secretly dating a delivery driver. A thunderstorm erupted at a family dinner. Screams could be heard even outside. Sage ran out of the house in tears, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. "I'm 20 years old. You can't tell me how to live my life. As long as you live in my house, fine. Then I'll move out." That night, she came to Aiden's house. She stood under his window until he heard the sound of pebbles hitting the glass. They talked till dawn. He told her about his mother, how hard it had been to watch her fade away. She shared memories of the mother she barely remembered, the one who died in a car accident when Sage was 5. Maybe that's why Dad is so hyper, she said thoughtfully, looking out at the first rays of sunlight. He's afraid of losing the only thing he has left. But that realization wasn't enough to stop their feelings. Spring was blooming, and with it, their love was blooming, secret, forbidden, and even more alluring because of it. Sheriff Caulfield didn't give up. He started showing up in the most unexpected places, like a shadow following his daughter. He set curfews, tried to control her every move. In response, Sage only grew more distant. She became adept at lying, at creating alibis, at finding ways to slip away. Martha was increasingly becoming their unwitting ally, covering up the lovers' meetings. "I've never seen her so alive," she'd once confided to Aidan, "but be careful. Garrett Caulfield isn't the type to give up easily." April was drawing to a close when Sage informed her father that she was leaving for an internship at the Marine Reserve. In fact, she'd planned to spend those 2 weeks with Aidan at a small waterfront motel in a neighboring town. "That's crazy," Aidan said when she shared the plan with him. "It's love," she replied, and kissed him in a way that made all doubt dissolve into the spring air. Neither of them could have guessed that these 2 weeks would be the last happy days of their history, that the May sun would bring not only warmth, but a tragedy that would change the quiet town of Camden forever. The May evening was unusually sweltering. Heavy clouds hung over Camden, promising a thunderstorm. Aidan parked the Amazon van in the service lot. The last delivery for the day had been completed. Sage was due back from practice in 2 days, but he knew she was already in town. Her text had arrived an hour ago. "Meet me at our place, midnight." Their refuge was the old lighthouse, an abandoned 3-story structure on the very edge of the headland. The locals considered it unsafe, but the lovers didn't care. There, on the top floor, they set up a little nest. They brought an old mattress, a couple of plaids, and an oil lamp. Aidan often left books there. Sage liked to read there, sitting on the windowsill and looking out at the sea. 2 weeks at the motel had changed their relationship. They'd grown closer, more honest with each other. They made plans for the future, maybe moving to another town, away from the all-seeing eye of Sheriff Caulfield. Sage talked about transferring to the University of San Diego, where there was a great marine biology program. Aidan could get a job anywhere. Amazon operated nationwide. But first, he had to survive the return. Sage was afraid her father suspected something. During their last phone conversation, he'd been unusually calm, almost friendly. That was more alarming than his usual outbursts of anger. Aidan pulled up to the lighthouse ahead of schedule. He parked the car in a thicket of junipers, an old habit, though there was no one on the Cape at this hour. Climbing the creaky stairs, he pulled out his cell phone, a new message from Sage. "I'll be a little later." Dad's home got to wait for him to fall asleep. Their room under the lighthouse roof was dark and cool. Aidan lit a kerosene lamp, its light creating bizarre shadows on the walls. He sat in an old armchair with a book, but he couldn't read. His thoughts kept returning to Sage, to their last days together, to her touch and kisses. The first drops of rain hit the roof around 11. By 12:30, a real storm was brewing. Lightning bolts lit up the ocean, turning it into a raging silver canvas. Showing. Aidan was getting worried. Sage still hadn't shown up, and his phone was showing no network. He heard the creak of floorboards on the stairs at close to 1 o'clock in the morning. He smiled. Only Sage knew how to tread to make the least amount of noise, but something was wrong. The footsteps were heavier than usual, more confident. The door swung open before he could get out of his chair. A dark figure stood in the opening, water dripping off his cloak, forming a puddle on the floor. "Good evening, Aidan." Sheriff Caulfield's voice sounded unexpectedly calm, too calm. "Sir, don't bother. I know all about it. About the motel, about your meetings here, about your escape plans? Aiden rose slowly. His gaze darted to the door, the only escape route. We love each other. Love? Caulfield grinned bitterly. You took advantage of a 19-year-old girl's naivety. My daughter. That's not true. Sage is an adult. She makes her own decisions. Decisions? The sheriff stepped forward. In the light of the oil lamp, his face seemed carved from stone. What decisions can a girl make who's drugged by the pretty words of a passerby? I'm not a trickster. I have serious intentions. Serious intentions? Caulfield drew something from his cloak pocket. The metal gleamed in the dim light. Like that guy in Portland, the one who dumped a pregnant girl 3 years ago. Aiden went cold. No one knew about that story. He'd almost forgotten about it himself. A stupid thing done when he was 18. Were you following me? I'm protecting my daughter. Did you think I wouldn't check your background? Not find out all your dirty secrets? Lightning lit up the room, freezing the window opening for a second, and the sheriff's hand was a gun. Sir, let's talk calmly. Talking his over, son. You broke one girl's life. I'm not going to let you ruin my daughter's life. I'm not going to let you ruin my daughter's life. The first shot caught Aiden off guard. Pain burned his shoulder, making him recoil against the window. The second shot was more accurate. The kerosene lamp fell, shattering on the floor. The flames instantly engulfed the old boards, soaked with oil and sea salt. Sheriff Caulfield watched the fire devour the room as Aiden's body disappeared in the smoke. Then he walked slowly down the stairs. Outside, the rain intensified. The thunderstorm drowned out the sounds of gunshots, and the smoke from the fire dissolved into the darkness of the stormy night. The sheriff got in his car and pulled out his cell phone. Dispatch? This is Sheriff Caulfield speaking. I think I saw smoke at the old lighthouse. Probably a lightning strike, said the fire department. Aiden's body was found the next morning. The official story was that it was an accident. Young man sheltered from the storm in an abandoned building fell asleep with a lighted lamp. Fire, carbon monoxide poisoning, tragic accident. Sage learned of Aiden's death from her father over breakfast. The sheriff was unusually soft, even gentle, hugged his daughter as she sobbed on his shoulder, said the right words about loss and grief. But Detective Talbot Reed, called in from the state to conduct a standard investigation, noticed a few odd details. Why were the deceased's clothes damp if he had allegedly spent several hours in the lighthouse? Why did footprints on the floor indicate the presence of another person? And most importantly, where did the 2 bullet holes on Aiden's body come from if the official cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning? Detective Talbot Reed didn't like small towns. In 15 years with the state police, he'd learned a simple truth. The smaller the town, the more secrets it contained. In Camden, mystery was in the air, along with the smell of the sea and freshly baked scones from Martha's Cafe. The investigation began as a mere formality, a review of a fatal accident. But something was bugging Reed. Perhaps it was Sheriff Caulfield's strange reaction to his arrival, too cordial, too open, or the way the locals fell silent the moment he entered the premises. So you're saying you were the last person to see Aiden alive? Reed sat at Martha's table, peering at the cafe hostess over a cup of cold coffee. Yeah, he came in around 9 o'clock at night, took a takeaway coffee and left. Nothing out of the ordinary. And he didn't say where he was going? Detective. In a small town, people don't discuss their plans, especially not with the people who make their coffee. But Martha was lying. Reed could see it in the way she avoided his gaze, the way she rubbed her apron. She knew something. Aiden's apartment was next. Mrs. Donovan, his landlady, proved more talkative. Such a good boy he was, she sighed as she showed Reed to his room. Always polite, calm, and he and Sage looked so good together. Sage, the sheriff's daughter. Mrs. Donovan covered her mouth with her hand as if she'd uttered something forbidden. I probably shouldn't have. But the point had been made. A new thread had emerged in the investigation. Sage Caulfield was proving difficult to interrogate. Pale, with eyes reddened with tears, she answered one-word answers, often going silent for half a word. We just saw each other in the cafe sometimes. Her voice trembled. Nothing much. And how did your father feel about that socializing? Sage flinched as if from a blow. What does my father have to do with it? Aiden died because of an accident, but the autopsy results said otherwise. 2 bullet wounds, 1 to the shoulder, 1 to the chest. Professional shots, close range. Someone really wanted to make it look like an accident. Reed started digging deeper. Sage's internship story turned out to be a fabrication. No one at the Marine Reserve had ever heard of an internship, but the coastal motel in a neighboring town confirmed that the young couple had spent 2 weeks there. Did the sheriff know? Reed asked Martha late one night when no one was left in the cafe. Martha was silent for a long time, wiping down the already clean cups. In a small town, everyone knows everything detective, especially those with power. The next day, Reed received the ballistics results. The bullets removed from Aiden's body were fired from a service weapon, Sheriff Caulfield's service weapon. But evidence wasn't enough. We needed witnesses. And there were witnesses in the form of a deputy who confirmed that on the night of the murder, he had seen the warden's car on the road leading to the lighthouse. The puzzle began to take shape. A romantic relationship between the sheriff's daughter and a simple driver. Secret meetings, escape plans, and angry father learning the truth. But something still didn't add up. Something important was eluding the detective's attention. The answer came unexpectedly as Reed looked through old police reports. 3 years ago, there was a case in Portland. A young girl accused her boyfriend of leaving her pregnant. The boyfriend's name was Aiden Morrow. But the interesting thing was, no report was filed. The case was hushed up because the girl turned out to be the daughter of a high-ranking police official. A phone call to Portland confirmed the hunch. That police official was an old friend of Sheriff Caulfield's. He'd warned him about Aiden as soon as he showed up in Camden. Protecting his daughter, Reed muttered, looking at the crime scene photos. But from what? From love? Or from the truth about the methods he used to try to stop that love? There was a knock on the door of his temporary office. Sage Caulfield stood on the threshold. Detective Reed. Her voice sounded firm, not at all like it had during the interrogation. There's something I need to tell you about that night and about my father. Red nodded silently and pulled out a tape recorder. The story was just beginning. Sage sat motionless, staring at one point while the recorder recorded her story. She told it all. The first time she met Aiden, the way her father watched her every move, the 2 weeks of freedom in the motel, the plans to start a new life. I was supposed to meet Aiden at the lighthouse that night. Her voice shook. But my father, he followed me all the way to the door of my room. I couldn't get out, tried to warn Aiden, but the phone wouldn't work because of the storm. Detective Reed listened in silence. He already knew what was going to happen next, but she needed to talk it out. When my father came home, he smelled like smoke. His clothes were wet. He said he was checking the report of a fire at the lighthouse, but I knew what he'd done. The next morning, Reed called Sheriff Caulfield to the station. He came in his usual uniform, calm and collected. Have a seat, Sheriff. Reed spread the crime scene photos on the table. Tell me about your service weapon. What exactly are you interested in, Detective? For instance, why the bullets recovered from Aiden Morrow's body were fired from it. Caulfield didn't flinch. This is some kind of mistake. Like your call to the control room, like your alibi for that night, like the story about your friend's daughter in Portland. For the first time, something resembling emotion appeared on the sheriff's face. You don't understand. I was protecting my daughter. From what sheriff? From love? From happiness? From the likes of him? Caulfield pounded his fist on the table. You think I don't know how it ends? Abandoned pregnant alone like that girl in Portland? I couldn't let that happen to Sage. Is that why you decided to kill him? I decided to talk, to warn him, but he said he loved her, that he would take her away from me. My little girl, all I had left after my wife died. The study door opened. Sage stood on the threshold. I'm pregnant, Daddy. Caulfield stiffened as if he'd been struck. Turning to his daughter, he opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. 2 months Aiden knew we were going to get married, told you, after my birthday. Sheriff Caulfield slumped in his chair. His shoulders slumped. For the first time in all his time on the force, Reed saw a strong man literally fall apart. I thought I was protecting you. You killed the father of my child. There was no anger or hatred in her voice, just endless weariness and pain. Reed snapped the handcuffs on the sheriff's wrists. He didn't resist. Epilogue. A year later, Talbot Reed was back in Camden. Martha's cafe still smelled of fresh-baked goods. Sage sat at a table by the window, holding a little boy with dark hair and gray eyes. Named him Aiden, she said, noticing the detective. The father, he writes me letters from prison, asking me to apologize, but I'm not ready yet. Reed nodded. He understood. In small towns, secrets lived long and wounds heal slowly. Sometimes I come to the lighthouse, Sage continued, sit on the rocks and tell the little boy about his father, about how we met, how we fell in love, how we dreamed of the future. I want him to know his father was a good man, and he was loved very much. Outside the window, the sea murmured and the seagulls shouted in the spring sky. Life in Camden went on. As it always had, Garrett Caulfield was sentenced to 25 years in prison for first-degree murder. Martha still kept her cafe, where a young woman with a little boy could now often be seen, and the old lighthouse sometimes lights up. The locals say it's Aiden's soul coming to see his son, but that's another story. It's been 5 years. Camden has changed, but it's still the same little town by the sea. Little Aiden went to kindergarten, the same kindergarten his mother had once attended. Sage graduated from university with a degree in marine biology and now works at a local research center. Martha has turned her cafe into the real heart of the town. A picture of the elder Aiden appears on the wall. A young man in an Amazon uniform smiling, holding a cup of coffee. Beneath the photo is a small plaque in memoriam. Every year on the day he died, Martha bakes special cinnamon rolls, his favorite. Talbot Reed asked for a transfer to the Coastal Division after that case. Now his office is only an hour's drive from Camden, and he often stops by to check on Sage and little Aiden. He's become something of an uncle to the boy. He brings birthday presents, tells stories about police work, teaches him how to cast a fishing pole from the pier. Garrett Caulfield is serving time in the Maine State Penitentiary. His letters come regularly, every month without exception. Sage puts them in an old shoebox without printing them out. Someday, she says, when the pain subsides a little, the old lighthouse has been restored and turned into a museum of maritime history, but the top floor where the tragedy occurred was left closed. They say that on stormy nights, you can still see the light of an oil lamp in the silhouette of a young man at the window. Mrs. Donovan rented Aiden's apartment to a new tenant, only 3 years silhouette of a young man at the window. Mrs. Donovan rented Aiden's apartment to a new tenant only 3 years later, a young teacher at the local school. But the room remained virtually untouched. The same wallpaper, the same old bed, the same books on the shelves. Some stories have to live on, she says. The Camden police station now has a new sheriff, a young woman from Portland. She's changed a lot of things, but Garrett Caulfield's picture still hangs in the hallway among the town's other sheriffs. As a reminder, she explains that even the nicest people can make terrible mistakes. And little Aiden is growing up remarkably like his father, not just in looks, but in character. The same soft smile, the same habit of helping everyone around him, the same ability to find common ground with anyone. Sometimes, looking at her son, Sage can't hold back tears. You know, she once told Martha, sometimes I think Aiden stayed with us after all. In my son's smile, in the sound of the surf, in the smell of your cinnamon buns. Love doesn't die, does it? Martha only nodded, wiping her tears with the edge of her apron. In small towns, stories don't end. They live on, intertwined with new stories, creating that special atmosphere that can only be found here by the sea, where memories are kept as carefully as seashells on a sandy shore. And if you ever find yourself in Camden, stop by Martha's Cafe. You might see there a beautiful young woman with gray eyes and a little boy who looks so much like the smiling guy in the picture on the wall. Order a cinnamon bun, sit by the window, and listen. Stories in small towns are always waiting for new listeners. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the video. Please like the video to support me, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you.